Hey everybody, I'm just so excited to talk to you today. We have been planning and preparing for the brain revolution for a long time, almost a year. And all of you who listen to me on a regular basis hear that we're in a war for the health of our brains. And the pandemic has just escalated the war. Brand new study came out this week from the Lancet where they looked at 280,000 people who had COVID-19. And a third of them in the next 6 months will have a new onset diagnosis of a neurological or a psychiatric illness. It's horrifying. I have about 50 COVID scans, some before and after, before people had COVID and after, and it fires up the emotional brain. We're in a war for the health of our brains before the pandemic. Depression had already been skyrocketing. It was at the highest level in the 40 years I've been a psychiatrist. Was at 8% in March of 2020. And then by August, it went to 28%. It had more than tripled. That's frightening, especially when you realize Alzheimer's that depression doubles the risk of Alzheimer's in women and quadruples it in men. Frightening. Anxiety's up, depression's up, suicidal behavior is up, addictions are up, self-harming behavior in teenagers is up 400%. We're in a war. Alzheimer's disease is expected to triple. There's never going to be a medication for it because it's not one thing. Diabetes is now 50% of the population is diabetic or pre-diabetic. 60% is hypertensive or pre-hypertensive. You have to ask yourself why the United States was hit so hard with COVID, and partly it's because we're not a healthy society. We're also not a happy society. We don't even make the top 10 in happiness around the world. We can do better. And being overweight and obese, it just keeps going up. The latest research I saw was 72% of adults are overweight, 42% are obese. But then if you go, well, what happened during the pandemic, especially for younger people, that those people gained weight. For younger people, on average, it was 41 pounds. And I published 3 studies that show as your weight goes up, the physical size and function of the brain goes down, which should just scare the fat off anyone. But one of the big lessons I've learned, this is not a gloom and doom talk, but it's a call to arms talk. One of the big lessons I've learned is the answer to these epidemic problems is not to see them as single or separate disorders, but rather as different expressions of the same unhealthy lifestyle that have exactly the same cure. And it's what my wife Tana and I call the Brain Warriors Way. And she and I do a podcast together, brainwarriorswaypodcast.com. But I partnered with my friend Joseph McClendon III, who's a neuropsychologist who I just adore. And we're going to get really serious about creating this revolution in brain health. You see behind me my new book, The End of Mental Illness. And really, I tell you, it's got 1,084 references. So everything I say is backed by multiple studies. But really the essence of it is we need to stop calling these things mental illness, anxiety, depression, PTSD, OCD, schizophrenia, bipolar. Stop that, because they're not mental, they're brain. The end of mental illness will begin with a revolution in brain health. And Joseph and I tomorrow have a special event where we're going to actually invite people to become trainers in the brain revolution. So we have a lot of great content. It's going to be a wonderful event. It starts at 11 o'clock Pacific time. And as I was just thinking about it, it's like I just had to go on all of our social media platforms and just tell people, if you want to be better, if you want to be healthier, both physically and mentally, cognitively, emotionally, we're going to give you the tools to do that. If you want to teach other people how to do that, we're going to give you the tools for that. And I am so excited about this revolution in brain health and to equip people to do that. brainrevolution.com. Some of the things you'll learn is our Bright Minds approach. One of the big lessons, and I go in detail in The End of Mental Illness, is if you want to keep your brain healthy or rescue it if it's headed to the dark place, you have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors that steal your mind. And we know what they are. Brain health, basically three things. It's brain envy. You got to care about it. Avoid anything that hurts your brain. You need to know the list. And the list isn't hard. I would argue most 7-year-olds would, if I gave them 20 questions, true or false, good or bad for your brain, they'd get 19 of them right. And then what's critical is to engage in regular brain healthy habits. I'm going to tell you a story tomorrow about how important this is personally to me, both with my granddaughter Emmy, but also with my dad. It's one of the most important stories of my life, that when he was a hard guy. I don't know if any of you have had a hard father, or you had a difficult relationship with your father. It seems in my house, with the 5 people who live here, that almost everybody's got father issues or mother issues. My mom was amazing, but my dad was hard. And when I told him in 1979 I wanted to be a psychiatrist, he asked me why I didn't want to be a real doctor, why I wanted to be a nut doctor and hang out with nuts all day long. And that hurt my feelings. But 40 years later, I sort of get it, why he said that. Because most psychiatrists don't actually ever look at the brain. They make diagnoses based on symptom clusters with no biological data. We've diminished ourselves at Amen Clinics. We're trying to change that. If you come to our clinics, we'll actually look at your brain and then based on what we see, develop a treatment plan to optimize the physical functioning of your brain rather than a cluster of symptoms. Anyways, I digress. And then about 30 years ago when I decided to look at the brain, and I'm like, oh my goodness, the brain is an organ like your heart is an organ. I need to get physically well in order to get mentally well, in order to get cognitively well, in order to get emotionally well, I actually have to get physically well. And then I started bothering people in my family, right? I mean, once you get this information, when you really understand it, you have to give it away. Once you really understand this information, you have to give it away. And so I start talking to my family. And I'm playing tennis with my brother. He's not really wanting to listen to me. I start nudging my dad in a Lebanese family. There's a lot of very healthy food and a lot of very unhealthy food. And so I start nudging him and he's like, oh, great. You're the nut doctor. Why did you just become a health nut? And he made fun of me. And for like 25 years, he diminished me. And that was pretty irritating. Now, thankfully, when I was a teenager, he called me a maverick because I wouldn't just listen to him. I had to have my own opinion. And so even though he diminished me, that only gave me more motivation to do the work I do. But about, goodness, I think it's about 7 years ago, he had mold in his house. He developed a chronic cough. He had a heart arrhythmia and then heart failure. And I went over his house. And he was depressed. And this is not someone who gets depressed. This is someone that creates depression in others. He's actually funny. When I nudge him to get healthy, he'd go, I don't get heart attacks. I give them. And then he'll go on and on about a story of an overweight salesperson that came to see him. He got angry and at lunch the guy had a heart attack. But now my dad is depressed and he has heart problems. And he looked at me and he said, I'm sick of being sick. What do you want me to do? And I gave him a plan and he's so stubborn, he did everything. And within a couple of months, he's lost. Okay, I'm sorry. We got stuck for a while. But I'm grateful to all of you. BrainRevolution.com. Hopefully I'll